overview of the work that the Development Finance Initiative is doing with the county. And then the bulk of this will be a breakout room, at which point we're going to encourage everyone to be on camera if possible. Understand that's not always possible, at least unmuted, so that we can have a more thoughtful conversation. And you all will have a chance to reflect on what you would like to see happen with these 3 county sites. At the end, we will all come back in from these breakout rooms, and we will have a little bit of a report back so everyone can sort of hear what each group is thinking about, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if you drop your questions in now or later, we will have Isabella from our team will keep track of those questions and bring them back at the end to have a bigger conversation. Okay, with that being said, let's get into it. So who are we? Why are we here? So we are with the UNC Chapel Hill School of Government. The school is incredibly unique in that it focuses less on, educating undergrads, where we don't even have an undergrad program, and more on research and training for local governments. So all of the different ways in which local governments serve their communities, we have experts at the school that are available to staff and elected officials to help guide them in what is both legal and what is good policy practice across the country. Our program is called the Development Finance Initiative, and we follow that same mission of the school to help local governments in what they do, but we focus on real estate development and finance. The local government will bring us in and they ask us to help them figure out how they can bring to their communities the type of development that they want to see. So instead of letting developers drive what gets done, the community is driving what they'd like to see, but leveraging developers to get that done in their community. We are neutral, nonpartisan, and our goal is always to respond to the needs of those communities. We've worked all across the state in communities, big and small, rural, downtown areas, which is actually very relevant to Buncombe for these particular sites. So what brought DFI into the mix, what brought, my daughter is screaming in the background, terrible timing. What brought DFI into the mix was the Buncombe County set some very ambitious goals for 2030. The goal is to address the extraordinary need that you all have for housing to serve low and moderate income households. And so we're talking about preserving and building thousands of new units across the county by 2030. Now, that need that I'm talking about, there are over 8,000 low and moderate income households in Buncombe County with severe housing needs. What that means is that they're spending more than 50% of their income on housing costs. So if you're earning $50,000 a year and you're spending half of that on your housing costs, you are struggling in Buncombe County. There is pressure across all housing types, across all income groups. If you are a renter and if you are trying to buy a home, there is pressure, and it's getting more and more difficult to access housing in Buncombe County. Now, what does low and moderate income mean in Buncombe County? So you all, if you had a chance to download that fact sheet, if you haven't, I still encourage that. The way we think about what is affordable is based on the area's median income. And we look at it based on a household size, right? So in your community, an entry-level police officer is going to be earning about $42,000 a year. So as a single household, that single police officer qualifies for affordable housing in Buncombe County. So they are considered low to moderate income. Now, if that police officer has a partner, and if that partner and they have a child together, for example, maybe that partner doesn't work, maybe they stay home and take care of the child because childcare costs are so high, that household is now squarely considered a low income household and would qualify for housing. So that income level, it's true for entry level firefighters, for your teachers. When you start talking about child care providers, so daycare, that goes even deeper into the low income household. So when we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about housing that's going to serve your workforce, that is going to serve households of various sizes in your community. So often there is a misconception that affordable housing, that way we're talking about it, is I think what you're all familiar with, which is public housing. Public housing is run by the public, right? By the Housing Authority of Buncombe County. But what we're here talking about is affordable housing, which is privately owned and operated. So it is a private developer that comes in and will build these apartment products that many of you are very familiar with, but probably don't even recognize is affordable. So DFI, Development Finance Initiative, we first came in to help the county choose sites that would be suitable for development. So that's a big, going back to those 2030 goals, those are big goals. So the county wanted to evaluate all of its property and say, okay, where could we actually build affordable housing? Which ones of our assets can we use to actually reach this 2030 goal? And so the Board of County Commissioners narrowed in on 3 sites, 5052 Coxe, Valley Street, 4696 Valley Street. It's kind of a weird address because it's a big block, and 180 Erwin Hills. Now, we did test fits at this point. What a test is to see, okay, how many units could we fit if we try to squeeze out every unit we can based on parking and all of that. And so what we did then was a very high level, right? It's just without any consideration for what the neighborhood can actually fit, what the community would like to see happen with the site. And so we're here now to get into the site-specific goals for these sites. So knowing that they're different, how can we get to a project that is feasible, right? What does it mean to be feasible? So the next step is DFI will work with an architect to figure out what we can actually fit on the site in a meaningful way, right? Within the physical constraints of the site, the regulations, but also within the goals of the community. And that's why we're here today, which is, what do you all want to see? We heard in an earlier meeting about preserving a building on the Valley Street site. So what would it mean to preserve that building and to build affordable housing around it and within it? Is it possible? The next big part of our process is the financial analysis, which is how much private investment, and by private investment, I mean banks, major investors, can we bring to the table so that the county can stretch its dollars as far as possible. And so what we'll do is we'll look at all of the private investment that is available and what, if any, public investment will be needed to fill the gap to make this a feasible project. Now, our goal is to help the county go out there and actually identify a development partner or partners that will finance, build, and operate this project. So once this project is financed, the county will leave the project. They won't be maintaining this over time. This will be a private development like any other in your community. Now let's get into the different sites. So in the downtown sites, it's a little bit different from Erwin Hills, and I'll talk about that. We've got 52 Coxe. On this, when we did a test fit, we looked at surface parking. You need to park some of these units to a certain degree, and how many units could we fit once we were able to park this, right? And so we looked at doing about a minimum of 120 units across these 4 parcels or properties that the county owns along Coxe and Sawyer Street. These properties are located within the central business district. So when we talk about how do we develop something within the regulatory constraints, anything that gets built here has to be consistent or has to follow the zoning required in this area. What's important to know is that the history of the site and these sites. And so this is a property, these are properties that are part of a formerly redlined neighborhood. When we switch to Valley Street, there is a building on the site. When we initially analyzed it, it was taking away the building. And again, given that we need to have parking as well, we saw about a minimum of 150 units that are possible on this site. Valley Street is also within the central business district. It is also part of a formerly redlined neighborhood. And very important to the community is that it is also part of the East End Valley Street Urban Renewal Project. So this site is part in the 70s and 80s. People lived here. There were homes in this area, and people were involuntarily uprooted and relocated in order to do stuff like build South Charlotte Street. And so there are efforts underway across the county and within the city to address this legacy. And so we want to make sure that anything that happens here, and you'll see that in the public interest, is consistent with all of it. There's also the Erwin Hills site. Now with the Erwin Hills site, it's a little bit different because we have different sort of dynamics. There's less complexity, I guess you would say. And so when we did a test fit, we said, what's the maximum number of units that we could fit here? And the maximum that we saw for the site is 160. There's would be no more than those 260 units here. Because it wouldn't make sense to build a parking deck in the middle of this community, right? That would never happen. So when we look at this, we're looking at a maximum of 160. Now, we looked at downtown, we looked at Erwin Hills, we looked at all of the county-owned properties. I want to remind you of that to find which ones actually make sense for housing development. And so we wouldn't be bringing down the EMS, it would just be the greenfield portion of this site. And, you know, we think of downtown and an area like Erwin Hills as differently. Downtown is all about density. It's all about thinking about how it fits within a dynamic downtown. And Erwin Hills is all about thinking about how we accommodate a more suburban rural community. So what we're here to talk about today are the public interests. So what are the public interests? What should we be referencing when we're putting together plans for these sites? Public interests are the community vision and the values for the site. They have to be relevant to that property, right? So we're not trying to reach general goals here. We are trying to think about this site specific and what could actually happen on that site. It should encompass a range, right? We will not know until we get deeper into the work exactly what can get done. So at this point, we want to leave wiggle room so that we can actually explore various scenarios. And what is important with anything that has to do with public interest is that there are going to be trade-offs. There are always trade-offs, right? So when we think about minimizing public investment and we think about building as many units as possible in a downtown setting, there's going to be more cost the more units you do, right? And so we need to, the board will be grappling with this. And as a community, we ask you all as well to really make sure that the public interests are reflecting that there will be trade-offs at some point. They will actually be very functional, these public interests. We're going to use them to compare plans, and we'll actually use them to compare proposals from developers down the line. So once we work with the architect, once we get into the financial analysis, that's when we're going to put together some feasible development plans. And it's not just one, right? There's possibility that there will be multiple feasible development plans. And in those plans, you'll have real definition about what we are considering. We are months away from this, right? Right now, we are at the public interest stage. Next stage, we will come back to the community with these development plans that will have number of units, income targeting, any additional uses on the site, number and type of parking spaces, how the buildings are oriented, what kind of construction is actually something we look at. And at that point, we'll know the amount and type of private and public, if any, investment. So as I said, we're going to take these public interests today, and we're going to use them. We'll use them to identify those plans, and we'll be back in the fall with those development plans so that you actually have a chance to say, hey, we don't think that this plan meets the public interest, or actually this one meets those public interests better than this one. And after all of this process, the county will then go out to solicit a development partner for these projects. So with that being said, we are going to break out into the small group discussions. What we're going to do for this is I am going to create some breakout rooms. Okay. I'm going to ask you all to sort yourself into the room that is of interest to you. So I know some people came out to talk about all of the sites, but because Erwin Hills is very different from the downtown sites, we want to keep those conversations focused on those sites. So I'm going to create some breakout rooms, and I am going to ask you to choose Erwin Hills or to